I've read the abstract. It looks incredibly exciting. So our guest speaker will be Dr. Caroline Beese, who's currently based at the Max Planck Institute for Human and Cognitive and Brain Sciences. But 10 years ago, Caroline was at the University of Greenwich. So Caroline, you're one of our alumna. So welcome back, and it's good to see you back here today. Okay, Maria sent me this slide. Lots of numbers, impressive numbers. Actually, it illustrates the sort of the activities that have taken place with CREL and its partners over the last 2 years. And what's been very impressive here from my perspective, and I monitor and support and aim to grow research across the faculty. And what's very important today is cross-disciplinary research, and it's really good to see how CREL is enabled that cross-disciplinary type environment. And you know, these are some of the numbers that we're seeing here in the sort of activities and interactions, both UK and internationally, that CREL is producing. I'm quite impressed. I didn't realize it was 38 events since the launch. I guess, Maria, this is the 39th. And that's pretty much 2 events a month. So that's very impressive. Over 1,000 attendees, 174 invited speakers, both from the UK and North America and in Europe. Also, good to see these close interactions. Here we have the visiting professor, Michael Putnam from Pennsylvania State, who's a visiting professor within CREL and is bringing expertise in that area of endangered languages. Also, the interaction here we're seeing with the Institute for Lifecourse Development and also the UK Reproducibility Network. So that's what we call these science practice hubs. Now, I'm an applied mathematician. It's very interesting for me to see presentations on statistics, but also Bayesian thinking being presented at these types of events. Very excited to see that cross-disciplinary activity and discussions taking place. Some other exciting presentations that we've had, looking at grammar. It always makes me think about Chomsky's universal grammar, and does that grammar gene really exist? Maria, I think I've asked you questions on that in the past. But looking at accents in Britain and these narrative seminars. I viewed one of these recently from my colleague Andrew King, who's doing a lot of work on Victorian periodicals. But again, that interdisciplinary explorations of theme of narratives. And these linguistic seminars, language analysis and its interface with logic, cognition or translation. Very impressive. And I'm delighted to see this happen, not just within our faculty, which is quite multidisciplinary with a number of schools that we have, but cross-faculty and international. That's really, really taking place here, and that's very, very good to see. So I'd now like to come back to our agenda, and Mark, I'd like to pass it to yourself. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Chris.
Maria, should I'll take my screen, stop sharing my screen?
Or you can leave it for the moment. I think it looks nice, unless Mark has something else to put on.
No, you don't really want to look at me, so keep looking at Chris's slide. That's wonderful. Thanks very much, Chris. I'm not going to say too much because I think Chris has already done a brilliant kind of survey of the relatively short history of CREL's under Maria's expert directorship, and all the activities and the plethora of things that have really happened despite the pandemic. And then, of course, we can't talk about anything these days without talking about the pandemic. But that did strike me as I was just reflecting on what Chris was saying, and I was going back to the event in Stockwell Street where many of us were there at the launch, which was another hot day from memory. But there are currently 79 of us now at this meeting present right now, and I do from all around the world, and it is something that I think we definitely will need to think about, is how we can carry on working in a way where we still want to be with each other and be present with each other, but we don't want to lose this facility that we've discovered over the past sort of year and a half of being able to connect with people across the world. And this idea of connecting out, reaching out and connecting with other people is obviously really important to the work that Maria's done with her centre. And it's completely appropriate, obviously, with a medium like language, which is the medium through which we're communicating now, and the medium through which all of us communicate, no matter what research discipline we have. Language is so endemic to our thinking and everything else that it makes complete sense that the work of CREL is so fundamentally interdisciplinary, and that's been, you know, I've joined over the course of the past years since we became sequestered away from the campus, a number of amazing CREL events, and they've all been very different, as Chris was saying, and but really invigorating, and again being able to connect with different people in different settings. And the last thing I'd like to say, really, apart from a huge thanks to Maria and Nancy and the team, is that despite changes that may be taking place sort of structurally in the university, this is something that we really don't want to lose. That this ability for our disciplines to reach out to others in other faculties, the way that Maria's collaborated, for example, with the Institute for Lifecourse Development, is something I think we really have to hold on to and keep reaping the benefits of that as we go forward. But that's all I really want to say. I'm really excited about what we're going to be hearing about. I think it's very opposite to what's going on now as we all think about aging, certainly myself, and you know, just again what's been happening over the past sort of year and a half. But yeah, huge thanks to the team for putting together this evening's work, and I'm excited to hear what's going to happen. Shall I hand over to Derek? Because I think Derek's next.
Derek, yeah. I think you have some slides, so I'll stop sharing.
Yeah. I've got some pretty pictures. Likewise, you don't want to look at me. So I shall share now. Sorry, it's just taking a bit of time to load. Okay. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, I can see it, Derek.
Yeah, good. Okay, so yeah, sorry it took so long. So yeah, a big thank you to Maria for inviting me along today. Like everybody else, I remember the launch. It was a lovely event. In fact, it also helped us in thinking about how we would launch the Institute for Lifecourse Development, which came very shortly afterwards, I believe. One of the things I just wanted to kind of flag really is first of all, people may not be aware of the what happens within our faculty, because obviously we do try and collaborate, but and I just wanted to kind of get a sense of, you know, across the ethos and the shared ethos between obviously what CREL's trying to do, what we're trying to do, and also obviously what across the university we're trying to do, and that interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary approach I think is really critical. So just to kind of show you in a kind of summary of what our faculty's about. It is about a life course approach. We have professionals training. We're training lots of different professionals across the life course who interface, with people, from pre-birth, midwives, looking at perinatal impact, all the way through to old age. And a lot of them are working together to solve problems for individuals in society, but also thinking much more about kind of collective integrated care and integrated pathways. And I think what's interesting today is obviously looking at aging, and the presentation today is around the end point of aging. It also has synergies with the start of aging in infancy, for example. So my own research looked at some very similar issues to the ones that we're going to be presented to later, using many of the same techniques, but looking at issues in babies, so looking at issues around inequalities and whether that impacts on neurological development early on, whether we can identify problems as early as possible in sensitivity to language, and also in things like visuospatial memory and so on, and then whether there are interventions that we can do using things like eye tracking to try and identify problems, and also train babies to look differently at the world and potentially help them. So that kind of perspective where you're looking right across the life course is really of interest to me. And I look at the beginning, other people look at the end. We actually look at lots of similar issues in relation to language, the emergence of language, and obviously the decline of language. And the thing with me, when I came to Greenwich, I was really interested in that kind of synergy across professions, across the life course, and also thinking about particularly around issues around inequalities. And you're looking at how inequalities impact on child development. That's within East London, where I was before, but also we're thinking about it, internationally. There are, of course, the Global Sustainable Development Goals, which the university is really committed to, and tackling issues around inequalities, also looking at quality education, good health, and so on. And these are all, I think, shared cross-disciplinary, cross-faculty, cross-university initiatives. And bringing that together, those are the kind of issues that really foregrounded the creation of the Institute for Life Course Development. It was trying to bring together all of these themes, all of these approaches into one reasonably coherent approach. And that's where I think we started that journey at the same time as CREL started. And we've actually, I feel like we've been orbiting around the same planet. So what I've got here is the Institute for Life Course Development and the particular themes that we look at: inequalities, workforce development, chronic illness and aging, exercise, activity, rehabilitation, thinking and learning, mental health, vulnerable children and families. And then on the right there, I've got CREL as one of our satellites, or it could be the other way around. We're mutually attracted and we're going around each other in our kind of universe of university. And I think it's really exciting that we've emerged and developed as a kind of ecosystem at the same time, and there's lots and lots of synergies between us. CREL's, as Chris said at the beginning, and I don't want to elaborate too much on this, CREL's had a very positive impact on cross-faculty collaborations. There's natural collaboration between ILD. Lots of activities have gone on, the Reproducibility Journal Club and so on, and statistics and issues around language decline are actually on the agenda today. So those are all things that we've been really interested in sharing. And the initiatives, as I said, have reached all corners of the universe. I'm hoping they're going to get further afield out to Saturn and maybe into the wider galaxy at some point in the future. And that's obviously the aim as we develop and co-develop in this kind of nice ecosystem, or whatever you call it, solar system. Anyway, so without further ado, I'll leave it there, but because I just want a chance for other people to obviously talk through the detail of these collaborations. But I just want to say a big thank you again to Maria and to everybody in the ILD as well, and for all the work that they're doing. We are definitely greater than the sum of the parts. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Derek, Chris, and Mark, for all your very generous words. And of course, all these figures and numbers are the result of a team effort. And this is what I want us to hear a little bit from the team. because you know, this doesn't happen overnight, and this doesn't happen with one person alone. So we've got, for starters, our fantastic advisory board, to which Mark and Derek belong as well. But we, you know, I need to mention our head of school, Zoe Petit, who's always there supporting for every query, big or small. We have here today some members of the advisory board as well. We have, I can see Mike Sharwood-Smith, and we also have Filippo Baillie with us, who is now contributing to support the some MA projects with us on machine learning, machine translation. Sorry, yeah, and the important thing is that we hear a little bit about the strands that we created, because you mentioned the launch before, and one thing that was a concern back then was how to balance an interdisciplinary center while maintaining focused and substantive and subject research. So research that is relevant to, that is subject specific, right? And the way we've done that has been through the creation of strands. And these are the colleagues who we are going to hear a little bit now. Of course, also to Rosanna Pacella, who I hope she's here, and I'd like her to say something, because this synergy that we have been mentioning between CREL and ILD sparked since the beginning, and it's been thanks to the support, collaboration, and lending ears of colleagues. So I'm going to give the word to Rosanna first, and then my colleagues who have been leading, and you'll see that the colleagues belong 50-50 to the two different faculties, which shows the collaboration. So Rosanna, if you are ready.
Thank you very much, Maria. I'm going to also keep it very brief, because Derek has already, you know, given a wonderful overview of the ILD, and obviously, you know, what Chris Baillie and Marco Thomas have already said. Really, you know, the strong collaboration that we have between CREL and ILD, I think most of that has been covered. But, you know, I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and I want to just say a special thank you to Maria for your leadership of CREL and the important work that you're doing. We have, Maria and I, already identified very strong lines of synergy between CREL and the ILD, and we've been working very closely together. I think everyone has already mentioned the very strong cross-faculty links, but it's not just for now, it's for the future. And looking ahead, I think, you know, Maria and I and others have discussed, you know, very important areas where we, CREL and the ILD, can work together, and we really look forward to a very fruitful interdisciplinary collaboration between CREL and the ILD, especially with regards to the Center for Thinking and Learning, the ILD Center for Thinking and Learning, led by Damien Poulter, and of course the very important work around reproducibility, the Reproducibility Journal Club, the great work that ECR, our fantastic ECR, Anna Samara, is doing around reproducibility in the CREL ILD Journal Club. So it's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I look forward to a long collaboration ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosanna. So before we go to the talk, let's hear a quick round of greetings from Anna. You've mentioned Anna Samara, so we can do the two Annas first, and then Katarina, Justin, and Neil.
Hi, would you like me to start now, Maria?
Yes, please, yes.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Hi, good evening, everyone. I just want to say some brief words about Reproducibility Journal Club, which Rosanna and Maria have just mentioned. So this is one of the activities that were launched in 2020 as part of the Science Practice Hub initiatives. that we began together with Maria and CREL. So reproducibility is a journal club that has the overall aim to promote discussions regarding open and reproducible science. It enables trading and knowledge sharing across different members of staff, students at all different levels of their career, and obviously tries to promote those discussions around how to do better science. And I'm very happy to report that we did some good progress in meeting those aims. We have been consistently attended by many members of staff and students from all different disciplines and schools, and have had some very interesting conversations regarding science practices. But even beyond that, I think one important thing about reproducibility is that it really marks University of Greenwich's commitment to good science. We are in fact now officially part of the UKRN, the UK Reproducibility Network. So we are part of a much larger network of universities. I believe now 133 institutions in 25 countries around the world that have this commitment to good science practices. So much to look forward to next year and some more sessions, but yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Ana Paula.
Yes, hello everyone. So as part of this Practice Science Hub, we also organize a series of workshops. I think we are all aware about how data is growing around us in many different fields and topics. And there has also been seen an increasingly use of quantitative methods, especially in social science, to complement other type of research. But maybe the statistical literacy hasn't grown at the same speed. So one of the aims of this series of workshops is to promote good practices in statistics, good ways to analyze data, and sometimes highlight common mistakes or misinterpretations, and discuss also alternative approaches that could be the Bayesian statistics on non-parametrics, etc. And of course, encourage interdisciplinary research. I don't want to convert you all in statisticians. Just want to be aware of some methods of analysis and encourage interdisciplinary research. A part of this, we have organized last year a full day of talks on stats, and this year we started with a workshop on frequencies analysis, and we ended discussing the Bayesian thinking. We will continue in this line next year, and I'm happy to say we have very good attendance and engagements. We have people from different faculties, institutions, and also international attendees, and very positive feedback. So yeah, looking forward for next year and more events.
Thank you, Anna, and very briefly, Neil, and then Katerina, before we move on to Del Talk. Thanks.
Hello, hopefully I'm audible.
Yes.
I prepared a little something, so I'm going to just quickly share my screen. So as this is coming up, so I'm Neil. I'm also a mathematician, working in the same school as Anna Paula. What I have here is the title of a talk that I gave earlier at the start of CREL, and as tempting as it is that I have a large captive audience in front of me tonight, I'm not going to give you the whole talk now, but just a little flavour of the things that we were been thinking about and would really like to continue into the new year. Mathematics on its whole, taken at first glance, may not have quite a lot to do with, say, cognition or language, but languages can be studied in a mathematical context itself, and the semantics or the meaning of a language in a mathematical sense can be understood by its syntactical features. And I first got interested in this area when I read this wonderful book by Daniel Dennett, From Bacteria to Bach and Back, which is all about how language evolves in the human mind. And what struck me about it was how mathematical it was in its arguments. And so very, very briefly, his main idea was this, that human comprehension is the end point of a long, long process of mostly blind competence. And this speaks very much to the mathematics of the mathematical view of languages, that a meaning of a language comes from its syntactical features, how we manipulate terms together, how we add things and subtract things. And Chomsky's already been mentioned, but language acquisition, in Dennett's view, is a mostly Darwinian process, a process by natural selection of selecting things that work, that allow an agent to make a difference. But he also goes a lot further to say that language allows for recursion. And once a mathematician hears recursion, we get very, very interested. And his main thesis is that the recursion, or language allows for recursion, and therefore allows us to be conscious of things that we could not otherwise be conscious of. And this is really at the heart of a lot of research, say in artificial intelligence and machine learning, is equipping a system to have a language that can allow for recursion. In other words, allow for the machine to ask itself questions. And well, in our own practice, I've been thinking a lot about this recently. There's always ongoing debates about mathematical education, but this sits very, very nicely with the CREL agenda of thinking about acquiring mathematics almost as a second language. And there's deep, deep research done in acquiring second languages. And I'd like to pursue some more research into thinking about acquiring mathematics as a language. And well, even more broadly, using this long argument or theory of a body of work that Dennett and Chomsky have come up with otherwise, we can try to quantify an agent's, whether it be a human or an AI's comprehension, where comprehension is understood as an end process of mostly blind competence. But that's me in a nutshell, and I really, really hope that we'll be able to get back into this and in the new year.
Well, that's lovely to hear, Neil. Of course, we will. A lot to discuss. Yes. Thank you. Can we get a word from the narratives, from the literature cell, Katarina and Justine?
Yes, absolutely. Justine, is it all right if I go first and you can sort of fill in and add your perspectives as well. So this is a joint venture between myself, Justine Baillie, and Emily Critchley, who is our colleague in creative writing. And really, narratives as a concept was something that we really have to credit to Professor Andrew King and Professor Maria Arche, since they were the ones who suggested this to me when I came to them and said, listen, we don't have an ongoing active research seminar in the fields of literature and creative writing. I really want to do something. I want to fit it into CREL. I want it to be interdisciplinary and to speak beyond literature and creative writing, but I also want it to be something that somehow really belongs to our disciplines as well and can really sort of produce high quality disciplinary research at the same time. So I really have to credit them for coming up and sort of shaping and encouraging us to a concept that has proved extraordinarily fertile, wide-ranging and promising for the future as well. Narrative, as it turns out, is a key feature, Maria will tell us, of language acquisition in children. Narratives are key to communicating research. Narratives are key to learning, it turns out. If you're in the fields of pedagogy, you'll know that narrativizing pedagogical experience is now recognized as one of the most successful ways of effectively sharing and engaging students. So what we have done is come up with a series of seminars. We've had 6 altogether this year, and our ideal format has been to combine in each session something, someone speaking from the perspective of literature scholarship, literary history in many cases, and someone from the creative writing fields, but we've also had translators. We have a postponed but much anticipated co-led seminar from Maria Arche talking about her own very exciting research in the field of narratives. She will be probably joining us from Amsterdam next year, I believe, where she will be pursuing research in exactly that field from within her discipline. So congratulations again, Maria. And Justine, speaking from a literary theoretical point of view, and Justine, as she can tell you herself, is an expert on post-colonial and world literature. So really understands the ways in which narratives shape experience, shape culture, and also circulate so widely. We were delighted with the way these seminars have run. And I have to say, I really echo what Mark Thomas was saying earlier about the way that the circumstances of this last year and a half have actually permitted us to reach much wider audiences. We had speakers and indeed attendees from across the globe, speakers from the US, from South America, from further east as well. And we had some really brilliant exchanges. I don't think there was a single seminar where the audience didn't get involved, start conversations. We kind of try to keep things informal so that those kind of synergies could develop quite naturally. So some examples of the kinds of things we had running. One of our first, in fact, indeed our first seminar of the year was led by Professor Emeritus David Ferrer of the University of Leeds, who is a world-renowned expert on 18th century literature, but has now also published his first two novels, historical novels set in the 18th century. So he spoke fascinatingly about how to narrativize and in an engaging way this kind of huge, massive built-up research expertise that he has in the field, and that led to some really lively debates and indeed some further projects that are developing and unfolding as we speak. Another example was a wonderful multi-speaker panel where we had a series of poets and their translators debating the question of what happens when we start to try and translate between one language to another, what the kind of narratives are around that kind of transmission, and how far those narratives about how translation works or should work actually relate to the kind of things practical translators find themselves doing. So that's just a couple of examples. We were also very lucky to offer a venue for our own from the University of Greenwich. So Dr. Jennifer Young, Senior Lecturer in Early Modern Literature, present a fantastic paper on her research in print history and the way we kind of try and reconstruct historical narratives about how physical texts come into being. And we also had a PhD, an early PhD, speaking about Gothic narratives. So altogether, it felt like a really fantastic start to what I hope will continue to be an engaging, exciting, and looking forward to next year, even more interdisciplinary venue for research discussion. So yes, thank you. Justine, do you want to add anything to that?
Just to add that, yes, we've really enjoyed organising the narrative seminar series that was originally developed by Katerina Stenke following Andrew and Maria, and we are very committed to developing, as you probably guessed, an interdisciplinary approach further next year. So the series, as Katerina said, is co-organised with our creative writing colleague Emily Critchley, who unfortunately can't be here, and we are really pleased to see CREL's continued development of cross-disciplinary work. So Emily Critchley, Katerina Stenke and I are going to continue to develop the narrative seminar with some exciting and interesting speakers already lined up for next academic year, a number again from overseas. So a combined international and interdisciplinary series is what is being planned. And linked to this is an international conference which we'll be holding next year on neo-slave narratives, and that we hope will provide invaluable knowledge exchange opportunities for Greenwich, for CREL and its communities, as well as a continuation of CREL's existing commitment to decolonising the university. And we're planning that will lead to an edited collection that will bring together our different disciplines, Katerina's in 18th century literature, Emily's interest in creative writing, and of course mine in post-colonial and American literature. So we've got lots of exciting plans for next year that will extend this seminar series into other activities and outputs. So we look forward to seeing some of you in September at those events.
Yeah, thank you, Justine. Oh wow, this shows how big and broad CREL is. So I think that we cannot leave it any further, Caroline. We want to introduce our guest speaker, which embodies with her expertise and background this connection and synergies that we have been speaking about. As we were commenting on at the very beginning, Caroline is a former student of Greenwich. She's one of our alumni. She studied the degree that our colleague Cecilia Val has been leading for many years now, Political Studies, Language and Culture. So welcome back home. And then she went on, I mean, that degree, the degree I was mentioning, gives the students the opportunity to choose linguistics and language courses, which Caroline did consistently, and that is what led her to study an MA and PhD in fields related to linguistics. So she's been always interested in the connections between syntax and neurocognitive factors, such as memory and aging. It is a pleasure and an honor to receive you here after you have been awarded with the Max Planck PhD Prize in 2020, if I'm not mistaken about the year. So congratulations from all of us who met you many years ago. Thank you very much for making time for us. And whenever you're ready, please start sharing your screen.
Thank you, Maria, for such a kind introduction. It's been really, really, really special being back here. I wish I could actually come to the campus. Let me just share my slides with you. Maria, can you see that?
Now, yes, everything is
okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's been such an honor to be invited by CREL. Thank you so much. And yeah, as you've said, I mean, ever since you've supervised my bachelor thesis, I was very interested in language, and also not language per se, but the language specific and the domain general factors and how they interplay. And so I just want to show you a little bit. Let me see. Okay, about my trajectory, where I've been to, what I've done, how my research has shaped. Maria was mentioning that there may be a couple of undergraduates, but otherwise it's also nice for those many familiar faces I can see here, Cecile and Zoe and Simon, and it's like, it's just been so nice seeing you all again. So yeah, I did my bachelor's thesis with Maria. I worked on the role of syntactic complexity and working memory in language acquisition. And so that's actually quite interesting for me to have started with language acquisition. And as Derek has said, there's always two kinds of language. There's the infancy, and there is also the other end of the lifespan. And so now I'm working with older adults, but it's really, really great to have started with child acquisition, to have actually a broader picture on these two different developmental times. So what's been really great for me, having studied in Greenwich, and I have such fond memories of that time, is the really large summer breaks that you have, because it gives you ample opportunity to actually use that time and do some internships. And after my first year, I did an internship in a speech therapy, which got me extremely interested in how language works in the brain. And then I went on after my second year in Greenwich to do an internship at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences, where I then later returned to do my PhD, and then again to do one of my postdocs. So all of this happened during my time in Greenwich, and it was also inspired by the lectures I had at Greenwich. So at the Max Planck Institute, during that time, I also worked on language acquisition, and I collected data then for my bachelor thesis. After I finished my undergraduate in Greenwich, I went on to do an internship after the third year at the Potsdam Research Institute for Multilingualism with Claudia Felser and Harald Klaassen. And that was mainly because of all the second language acquisition classes I took in Greenwich. So again, this part of my career has again been shaped by my lectures I had at Greenwich. So yeah, I'm still, as I said, I still have such fond memories of that. And after that, I did my master's in cognitive neuroscience. So I took this very theoretical, back then at least, theoretical degree I did in Greenwich, and went to a very neuroscientific degree. And I focused on language in the brain during these 2 years. It was a research master's. And during that time, I worked together with Diana Dimitrova and Will Willems. Again, on the interplay between language-specific and domain general functions. Specifically, I actually looked, always working with syntax, I looked into how sentence structure can focus our attention on certain information while drawing the attention away from other parts, and what implications that then has for our memory for that sentence information. That was then with younger adults. And then I went on again to study language-specific versus domain general functions in language. And I worked together with Lars Meyer and Angela Federici again for my PhD, where I was then interested in what if one of the domain general functions that we need for language processing, like verbal working memory, is impaired, not necessarily by any condition, but more like by natural healthy aging. So we all know that during the course of life, memory declines. So what effects does that have on our language processing? This is what I looked at in my PhD, and the work I will tell you in a minute about. And this was work I then collaborated with another Max Planck Institute here in Berlin for human development, together with Markus Werkle-Bergner and Roman Lindenberger. And this is also then how I started working for both institutes the last 2 years during my postdoc. Okay, so much about that. By the way, if you have, so I'm going to start talking a little bit about my work. If you have any questions in between, please just interrupt me before I'm losing anyone. All right, so today I'm going to show you 3 projects I did on the effects of neurocognitive aging on language processing. I first looked at whether there are language-specific differences in sentence processing and healthy aging. So that was really about the contributions of language-specific aspects to the decline in language functioning. I then looked in another study, that was an EEG study, on the role of verbal working memory in sentence processing and healthy aging. And at the end, that's a very recent project, so this is still in preparation to be written up. It's about the role of inhibition during word retrieval. So the first 2 are more about syntax, whereas the last project is then more about the semantic part of it. All right, let's start. So if older and younger adults, if you give them a sentence like the tailor made the coat, there's no problems whatsoever for older adults to understand that small sentence. However, if you give them a longer sentence like the tailor made the coat that the actor needed for the performance, and you ask them a comprehension question, you see that the performance declines. The question is that I was asking for my PhD then was whether that is because from the tailor made the coat to the tailor made the coat that the actor needed for the performance, first of all, we have the sentence carries more meaning, but then it is also more complex from the structure of the sentence. So having a main and a subclause. But on the other side, it is also more working memory demanding because more information has to be held in memory. So first of all, I looked at this y-axis here. I looked at the interplay between meaning and structure and the availability of having meaning and structure in the sentence and how that is used to maybe different extents by older and younger adults. So as I was mentioning, older adults, verbal working memory declines with age. And so maybe they would use the meaning and the structure of the sentence in different ways to basically counteract their verbal working memory differences. So that is the project together with Roman Lindenberger, Angela Federici, Markus Werkle-Bergner, and Lars Meyer. And what I relied on was basically 2 processes. First of all, if we hear a word like blue and boat, we would never process these 2 words separately. We would also never remember these 2 words separately. But what we would remember is one single conceptualization of a boat that is blue. Thereby we reduce the verbal working memory demands from 2 to 1 entity. And very similarly, that happens also in syntactic processing. When we have single words like the and granted and the and ruined and soup and with and the and salt, so 8 single words, that would be quite verbal working memory demanding, specifically given that that working memory capacity is only 4 plus minus 2 entities that we can store in working memory. But because we're language users and we know how to understand this language, and we're we're proficient in our language, we know how to merge these words together to phrases to create larger entities. So we have the and granted as one phrase, we have a verb phrase, and we have a prepositional phrase. And suddenly we reduce this load from 8 to 3. And if we're very proficient, very good with our verbal working memory, we can even make this into one larger phrase or one sentence and reduce the load to 1. So I, in my experiment, in my first one, played exactly with the availability of the semantic and syntactic information. And I created sentences of real words like the granddad ruined the soup. And I scrambled that sentence to the ruined the granddad soup to dissolve the syntactic information. So there's no syntactic information anymore that you can rely on, no word order, so to speak. On the other side, I removed the semantic information. So I replaced all the content words with pseudo words like the spirit, poof, the mook. And then I scrambled that again to the poof, the spirit, mook. And I created a task for all these conditions, which was a serial order task where I asked participants, did granddad come before soup? And that question can actually be answered for all conditions. So granddad came before soup here, granddad came before soup there. Here I would have asked that spirit come before moop, spirit before moop. And one thing when I constructed the stimuli that I did was, so basically what you take out is the availability of the lexical semantics. But by scrambling a sentence, you also sort of take away the sentence meaning, so the sentence level meaning. So I did not want to manipulate that, and that could have been a confound. So what I did was I used a left corner top-down parser that I trained on the Tiger Tree Bank, and I got that surpriser value. So basically what it means is on the syntactic surpriser level is how surprising is it to have a noun after a determiner? How surprising is it to have a verb after a noun phrase? And so you get a surpriser level for every single word. And you can do this not only on a syntactic level, but you can also do this on a semantic level. So how likely is it that granddad comes after the word the? How likely is it that, or how surprising is it that ruined comes after the granddad? So here, for instance, you can see very nicely, this is a low surprisal value. So it's not surprising that the comes at the end of at the start of a sentence and that granddad may follow. It's maybe a little bit more surprising to have ruined afterwards. So, but what I did is I averaged all these surprisal values and made sure that between sentences and word lists, the average of the surprisal is not any different, so that we actually controlled for the confound of taking out meaning already by scrambling sentences, so that we really made sure to only have the difference, I just go back, between meaning between the real words and the pseudo words. Okay, if anyone has questions about this, please just ask. Okay. Otherwise, I would already show you the results. So here you see the younger adults on the left, the older adults on the right. The lists in each of the plots on the left, the sentences on the right. And the darker ones, the darker dots are the real words, the lighter blue are the pseudo words. And what you see is, I don't know how familiar everyone is with D prime. D prime is a measure of the signal detection theory. It is basically taking into account the hits while sort of punishing for the false alarms. So if one participant would always say, yes, soup always comes before or after granddad, then that person would have gotten it always correctly. And that means that person would have had a really good performance, while actually that person also performed really badly on the other trials. So this is really taking into account the trials where participants performed correctly, but if they had false alarm, they would have been punished for it. So if they had had that strategy of always clicking yes, then they would have a D prime of 0, which is a really bad score, and 3 is really good. So what you see here is, we'll just look at the younger adults first, that sentences are generally performed better than the lists, and you see the same overall effect in the older adults. You see the same pattern also, that real words are better remembered than the pseudo words, and you also see this in both of the sentences. So then for my meaning condition, you see actually no age difference for real words over pseudo words, and that is accounted for any working memory differences. So I also tested participants for the digit span, forward, backward, and the non-word repetition span, and even though there were age differences and the verbal working memory, accounting for it as a covariate in the stats did not make a difference for that effect, that there's no age difference for real words over pseudo words. But however, if you do the same for the structure and you look at sentences versus lists, you see here from the list to the sentences, this is a larger increase in performance than you see it in the older adults. So it seems that younger adults benefit actually more from having syntactic structure than older adults. And there's a couple of ideas I had about that. So first of all, the question is whether this lifespan shift is whether that is a lifespan shift in a focus from structure to meaning. And one of the ideas is that they just go for good enough processing. So they don't bother anymore to actually encode all the details about the sentence, all the morphosyntactic details, all the function words. Maybe they just go for granddad ruined soup salt. You would probably still, if you perceive it in that order, understand what is said. At the same time, that strategy would reduce the working memory load, because if you only remember 4 words, you immediately reduce your load from 8 to 4 without having to perform any linguistic operation. And another part that also may play a role is that it's been shown that syntactic information, also called surface information, actually declines much faster than semantic information. So also that then makes sense if that is the case, that they focus more on meaning. And it's also been shown in other literature that older adults actually focus more on the gist of sentences than on detailed information. So this all worked out fine with the literature, with prior literature. Okay, and basically what this overall shows is that there are actually declines in language-specific functioning, because if there hadn't been the verbal working memory decline would have had the same effect on meaning and on structure, but it didn't. It didn't actually play any role in the decline of structure and the preservation of the meaning. Okay, so now that we've looked at that part here, we can say, okay, adding more meaning probably doesn't really make a difference for older adults compared to younger adults, but having a more complex structure actually does. And this is also, if you look at, these are really old studies from the 80s and beginning of the 90s, where a lot of people have actually shown that if you give subject and object relative clauses to older adults, they actually have much more problems with the object relative clauses, and also more than younger adults. So structure seems to really make a difference. But the question remains is of the general role of verbal working memory. And that was my EEG study that I did together with Angela Frederici and Lars Meyer. And what we did here, so we didn't want to use a syntactically complex sentence, because we know that syntactic complexity actually adds on verbal working memory load. But what we did instead is we used a flat structure with more meaning. So basically exactly what I've shown you here, the meaning remains preserved and they have only problems with structure, I don't manipulate the structure, but I only add on the meaning. That should only then have an effect on the verbal working memory. And so I played with that, and I created these really long sentences. So just to say, I'm going to say male and female, but in German, so it's an experiment in German, it's encoded in the word. So we had the participants, younger, middle-aged, and older adults, listen to sentences like, the male presenter has announced the male writer and the female singer, and the female presenter has announced the male actor and the female artist. And then they saw a sentence, the male one announced by her was nervous. So now they really had to decode who was nervous. And that was quite a tricky task. So this may seem very, very overwhelming, but once you do 10 of these sentences, you know what you're doing. So basically what you have to realize is that each of these clauses contains a subject and two objects, whereby the objects was each a male and a female person. And in the second clause, it was always then the other gender of the subject. So if the presenter had been male in the first clause, it would have been female in the second clause, but also vice versa. And so if it says the male one announced by her was nervous, you can see here the female presenter has announced the male actor. So announced by her was then the female presenter and announced the male actor and the female artist. And if we say the male one announced by her, then it had been the actor. So now after decoding that part, they also had to connect it to the adjective being nervous. So then we asked participants, was the actor nervous? And they could either say yes or no. And I call this an encoding sentence, a retrieval sentence, and comprehension question, because we actually borrowed what comes in the following from the memory literature. So what we did is we recorded the EEG during this whole experiment while they were encoding the sentence into their memory, and then while they were decoding and retrieving part of the encoding of the priorly to the sentence that they had prior remembered. I'm not quite sure how familiar everyone is with the EEG, at least back in the days when I was at Greenwich, there was, I don't think, an EEG. So I'm just quickly gonna explain what it is and what I have done. So here you see one of my actually middle-aged, middle-aged adults with an EEG cap on, where I placed the electrodes on one by one. And by the discharge and charge of the electrons, you can pick up the electrical activity with the electrodes, and you get a signal like this. And this is what it looks for me on the computer when I read in the data. And you see here this wave nicely oscillating, and these waves, these EEG waves, the signal can be described in different ways. And one way is describing by frequency. And so each of the signal has a frequency. As you can see here, very slow waves, you have faster, and then faster and faster waves. So it goes from delta, theta, alpha, and to beta. I was mainly interested in theta and alpha activity, which I'm going to show you in a moment. And all of these bands have been actually related to different parts of language processing, but also to parts of memory, like encoding. And so, as I was saying, I used the memory design. I mainly looked at theta and alpha because it's both been related to language and memory. All right. So what I then did is to look at the trials where the comprehension question was correctly answered versus the trials where it was not correctly answered. And answering this question correctly indirectly means that the person here was retrieved correctly, but for that to happen, it also had to be encoded correctly. So therefore, I can say the encoding sentence was later remembered, and therefore there had been an encoding success. Whereas if the sentence was incorrectly answered, it is very likely that the person did not remember it. And if the person did not remember it, it's very likely that the person had an encoding failure already here. So this is really like asking, what does it take to comprehend a sentence successfully? And this design is very established in the memory field and is known as the subsequent memory effect. And what you do is you basically just compare the EEG signal and you subtract the signal from the later not remembered from the later remembered signal. And that difference in the theta and alpha range, so in the theta range, they found positive, we call them SMEs, subsequent memory effects, have been related to memory formation. So when the sentence is encoded, I can presume a memory trace has been formed for that sentence, for the content of that sentence, for the syntactic information of that sentence. On the other side, negative SMEs have been mainly found in the alpha range and have been associated with the what is called gating of information during the encoding, which means to let information either in or block the information out. So the cortex, while the information is processed by the brain, parts of the cortex can inhibit information, so block it out, or disinhibit information to let it in. And alpha, the negative SME in alpha has been associated with this gating of information. And interestingly, age differences so far in the memory literature had been found for negative, but not for positive SMEs, which then I took as, if I apply this to language, I could say, okay, older adults would still be able to encode a sentence correctly, but would maybe not be able to actually let all the information in, but also to block information out. And this is also actually what I found. I found age differences as was expected in the lower alpha band range. So alpha is again from 8 to 10 and from 10 to 12 hertz. So there's a lower alpha band and an upper alpha band, so 8 to 12. But the lower and upper alpha bands have been associated with slightly different functions. And what you see really nicely here is, again, you see a decrease in the younger adults and an increase in the older adults, and the middle-aged adults are somewhere in the middle. And it's a nice progression from the decrease to the increase in the SME. So it's really a flip what happens. And as you see here in the upper right corner is a general decrease in the performance of that comprehension question. And so now we can relate that that decrease in the behavior, what we see here, with the EEG difference between the correct and the incorrect trials. And so basically what the study tells us is that sentence encoding relies on different mechanisms in older and younger adults. And this decrease and this increase can be nicely also interpreted with this, what I told you, the gating of information. So a decrease in the alpha would mean then a cortical disinhibition. So if the cortex is disinhibited, it lets lots of information in, which means younger adults are able to extract very detailed information. And also their verbal working memory capacity would allow for a lot of detailed information to come in. Whereas whether in comparison in older adults, you see with the increase in that SME and alpha, see cortical inhibition, which means information is blocked out by the cortex, and therefore not all detailed information about the sentence can be processed. And instead, older adults may then rather extract just information, just in line with the behavioral study that I showed you before. But so that whole idea about the inhibition and disinhibition on the cortical level really led me to more research on inhibition. What role does actually inhibition play? So if you have a limited verbal working memory capacity at old age, you just cannot encode all the detailed information anymore. So what abilities do you have? For instance, you can inhibit information that you don't need and only focus on relevant information. However, older adults have been shown to have an inhibitory deficit. So I was very interested in that role of inhibition, and I didn't start with sentences. I happened to find very nice collaborators for a project on word processing. So that is Cornelia von Scherpenberg, Helmut Ulbricht, Sandra Martin, and Gesa Hartwigsen. And we worked on that project together, and I'm just going to introduce you a little bit to this idea of inhibition. So when does inhibition occur during language processing? Inhibition always occurs, obviously, when we have co-activated competitors. So in our mind, words are organized in similarity neighborhoods like frog and frost and so on on phonological similarity mainly. That those words get activated in cascaded fashions based on that similarity, and creates competition between them, these co-activated candidate words that then have to be inhibited in order to select and retrieve the target word. And studies by Sommers, for instance, the one from 1996, show that when you compare easy versus hard words, so easy words are those that only have few phonological neighbors, like purse, nurse, curse, worse. But you have also hard words that have many phonological neighbors, like bear, pair, wear, dare, hair, and so on and so on. And so it's way more difficult to actually, and it takes way more inhibitory efforts to inhibit the harder words to select one of the target words than it is to inhibit just a few phonological neighbors from purse, for instance. So it has been then shown that when you compare younger and older adults, that older adults actually identify fewer harder words than younger adults, whereas this difference did not exist at all for easy words. And so Sommers and colleagues have related that to the transmission deficit theory, but it is also possible that this is related to the inhibition theory. So just to show you these two theories, the inhibition deficit theory from Hescher and Sachs shows you that older adults have difficulties inhibiting irrelevant information. And in our case here, this would be the co-activated non-target candidate words. So, but just to emphasize this, an inhibition deficit would affect all areas of language equally. So if I have problems with my inhibition, then I do not only have problems inhibiting co-activated non-target candidate words, but I may also have difficulties, for instance, inhibiting morphosyntactic information that I don't need, or function words that I don't necessarily need to understand the sentence when I have a limited working memory. So that is a cognitive theory applied to language. And now comes a language theory applied to aging. That's a transmission deficit theory. And that theory says that the connection between the words weaken. And that then means when we go for the spreading activation account, that the activation cannot be transmitted from word to word as efficiently anymore. And that is specifically on the phonological level, because we have a mainly unique sound meaning mapping, whereas semantic connections between words maybe not as unique. So if we can't think of a word, you can always either describe it in other ways, or you find, if you want to say sofa, but you can only retrieve couch at that moment, that is also fine, and people would know what it means. But if you mean something very specific, like a specific dog, like a Dalmatian, then either you know that sound mapped to that Dalmatian, to that dog, or you don't. So, and those phonological connections weaken at age. And it could be related to both of these theories. And I was mainly now interested in the inhibition deficit theory. And not only on the phonological level, but if it actually affects all language areas, then it should also affect the semantic connections. So together with these people, we did this project here with a picture-word interference paradigm while we were tracking their eye movements. And so younger and older adults looked at these words here, like jacket, camel, deer, bicycle, couch, and so on, not with the circles around. That's just to emphasize here now the category membership of a few words. So some of these words in the circle of 8 words belong to one semantic category, whereas the other words belong to other categories and also never to the same. So in this case, 3 different semantic categories. And participants looked for about 6 seconds to these words. So it's 6 seconds to read these words, and were then presented with either a related picture or an unrelated picture. So if we here have the semantic category of hoofed animals, you would see a horse. Otherwise, you see a cup that has nothing to do with the animals. And the idea is that if this semantic category is pre-activated, then there are candidate non-target words that are co-activated and need to be inhibited at the time of retrieval of the horse. Whereas if this semantic category of hoofed animals is pre-activated and an unrelated picture comes, then those words do not have to be inhibited because the picture that has to be named has nothing to do with that category. And what we have found is, so what you see here is, I go through it step by step again, younger adults on the left, older adults on the right. You see, first of all, related picture type versus unrelated picture type. And you see the black lines in both age groups on top of the unrelated pictures. So this is exactly what I mean. This is what we predicted, is that it's more difficult. So the naming latencies, it takes people longer, both younger and older adults, to name a related picture, so to inhibit the co-activated words, than to name an unrelated picture. However, so as we looked at eye tracking, we could look at the fixation durations on the category members. So as I was saying, the hoofed animals that were pre-activated. So what you see here is the fixation durations to the members versus the non-members. And here we saw a very interesting age effect, or interaction effect. Younger adults, if they look longer to the members, so if they pre-activate the category stronger, they actually take longer to name it. And this makes a lot of sense. This is basically just replicating what has been shown before. So if you look at the category longer, you may also pre-activate, either you pre-activate it stronger or you pre-activate also a lot more members from the category that are maybe not seen at this moment. And then it becomes harder and harder to actually inhibit all of these co-activated competitors. In comparison, you have the older adults, and the longer they look at the members versus the non-members, they become faster to name the pictures. So that was really a very interesting finding, and we're still discussing these findings. This has been pretty new in the literature. I've been discussing this with many other people already. So also, if you have any ideas, please let us know. Yeah. So to summarize this study has then shown us that older adults actually remain able to successfully retrieve words by allocating more resources to the pre-activation of a semantic category, and thereby they may actually counteract the inhibitory deficits. And these findings cannot so nicely be related to the transmission deficit because it's basically also on the semantic level and not on the phonological level. And so just to summarize all of these studies, in the first study, we have seen that the declines in language functioning are language specific because we saw the difference between meaning and structure. In the second study, we've seen that declines in language functioning are also domain general because they relate to the memory and coding success. And now in the third study, we've seen that that the declines in language functioning also relate to another domain general process, and that is inhibition, and specifically in the inhibitory deficits in aging. And to summarize it all, I can say that the effects of neurocognitive aging on language processing can be captured in a model of balance between preservation and decline of both language-specific and domain general cognitive functions. And with that, I would like to thank all my colleagues from the 2 labs, my collaborators. I would like to thank you for listening and for the invitation again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you. Very, very